everyone, I am Priyanka Wilson and welcome to GS Score series of Decoding the UPSC syllabus with macro topic detailing. This is the second video in the syllabus decoding of economy for UPSC. In this series, Gaurav Bansal sir will cover the rest of the syllabus with macro topic detailing along with previous year questions mapping. So guys, if you like this video, so please like, share and subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon for regular updates. Thank you.
Hello students, my name is Gaurav Bansal and we are discussing syllabus for Indian economy. And in the previous session, we have discussed the UPSC provided syllabus. And we also identified that there are weaknesses in that, there are issues with that. So in this session, we are going to discuss the study plan, how you should study, and the syllabus in complete details, what all should be covered so that you can attempt every question. Okay, so if you want to cover every question, this is the scope of our syllabus. So first of all, we should start with the topic of economic growth. Okay, and when we have to start understanding the growth, we need to start with national income. What is national income? What are the different measures of national income? Okay, different concepts under that, GDP, GNP, NDP, NNP, personal income, all of that we need to know. And there have been PT questions directly and many questions, in fact, in past years from these topics. And not only from PT perspective, but in order to develop our concepts, even in mains, we need to be aware of the GDP. Then the next topic should be economic growth versus economic development. Okay, this is very important because growth is a necessary but not the sufficient condition. You may have growth, but you may not have development. The example is many West Asian countries, which are also called the Middle East. There are many countries in the Middle East. For example, Qatar has one of the highest per capita income in the world, is one of the most wealthy countries in terms of resources. But the development levels are very poor compared to that. Better than India, of course, but compared to their income level, development is not there. Then measures of economic development. And economic growth, for example, we can measure with national income. That what is my GDP, how much it is growing, what are different concepts in that. But how do we measure the development? Growth can be easily measured, but development not so easily. For that, we have more complex procedures. And in that, we have different concepts like human development, like green GDP, gross national happiness. Although sometimes it is argued all these gross happiness, green GDP, etc. is farce, is not that important. Okay, because there are many countries which are doing so poor in every aspect, yet they rank very high on certain indicators. Doesn't really look very convincing. And then you need to know what is economic and social development. Okay, and that too in Indian context. So how is India performing regarding various social indicators, regarding poverty, regarding environment? So MDGs, Millennium Development Goals, Sustainable Development Goals, SDG, they essentially covers these perspectives. Okay, they cover right from environment to gender to poverty to inequality. So all of these perspectives also we need to know. And then we also need to be aware of the Sustainable Development Goals, SDG I've already mentioned. Okay, so that all is very important to begin with. We have not yet gone into the core economics, but we are still just talking about the economic measurement. How do we measure the economic growth, the economic output, the welfare? The measurement is very important. Without that, we cannot do anything else. And then we have the Indian economy. So when we start talking about Indian economy, the first topic that we have is the issues related to planning in India. Okay, so with what kind of conditions we started the planning process in India? What were the features of earlier planning period? How we changed them over time? What we changed in 1991? Okay, and for that we need to know the phases of India's economic growth. So, for example, 1950 to 1965, this is the first phase of growth. Then 1965 to 1980, 1980 to 1990, these are different phases of growth in India. And then there are certain phases of economic reforms. What happened in 1991 was a watershed moment in Indian history, and particularly in Indian economy. And we divide Indian economy into pre-1991 and post-1991. The post-1991 economy is also called the post-reform economy. So, in the post-reform economy, we look at it from the perspective of reforms. The first generation reforms, the second generation reforms, the third generation reforms, basically the idea of rising India, emergent India, growing India. Okay? So that is captured in that. How we are improving on different aspects. What are the gaps that we have not been able to cover so far? And then the mobilization of resources. Okay. So it is mentioned in the syllabus and needs to be done, but how it needs to be done. So for that, we need to study this. First of all, how do we ensure that the savings become the investment? This is the job, or this is the mobilization of resources. How savings become the investment. So in that context, we need to know the role played by government in ensuring how investment increases, how more savings reaches to investment, how financial system ensures that. So we had an earlier session in which we discussed the UPSC provided syllabus. I've discussed it in detail there as well. Okay. And then how does the international trade, international capital, the FDI, etc. also matters a lot regarding mobilization of resources. We need resources for growth. We need resources for investment. It is investment which brings growth, essentially. So from where I'm going to get the resources? How do I ensure that all the savings in the country can be accessible to the entrepreneurs, the government? How we can make it more useful, utilizable? Okay. Now, from this section, the growth, development, and planning, if you look at the past year questions, do you agree that Indian economy has recently experienced V-shaped recovery? Give reasons in support of your answer. This is a question directly from this section that we have discussed. So for this, you need to talk about the GDP data. You need to talk about certain parameters. This is a topic question on the measurement. So Indian economy was performing in a certain way, then suddenly we had a decline, and then we immediately had a bounce back that makes the shape of a V. So we need to provide data in support. Okay, this was a question asked in the last mains. And then in the previous year, define potential GDP, explains its determinants. What are the factors that have been inhibiting India from realizing its potential GDP? That was in 2020. Again, a question on measurement. Potential GDP, what we can achieve, what should have been there, why we are not able to achieve that, what mistakes we have made, what problems are there, what resources we do not have. Okay, so that is it. Then in the year earlier, do you agree with the view that steady GDP growth and low inflation have left the Indian economy in good shape? Give reasons in support of your argument. Okay. So again, it is a question on economic measurement, economic indicators, and the macroeconomic stability. So from this section, almost every year you can see a question. So 2018, 19, 20, 21, every year there is a question. In fact, in some years there are more than one. We have not mentioned more than one question in single year. Okay. How are the principles followed by Niti Aayog different from the Planning Commission. So again, it is a question, direct question on India's planning. Next, the role of government in the economy. Okay, so when we talk about the role of government, there are various perspectives into that. First of all, the government budget. UPSC just mentioned this much, government budget. But what all is new? First of all, the budget itself, the classification of budget, types of budget. And within that, we have revenue budget, capital budget. Then we have deficits. Apart from that, we also have outcome budgeting. We have the performance budgeting. We have zero-based budgeting. We have gender budgeting, green GDP. We have so many different aspects in budgeting itself. On that also a direct question can be asked. Then all the concepts related to taxation. Okay, tax incidence, tax evasion, Laffer curve. These are just samples. There are many concepts in taxation. And then we have taxation in India. What are the different taxes in India? How do we divide them? First of all, the classification. Essentially, direct and indirect taxes. Within direct taxes, what all taxes we have? How do those taxes help the economy or affect the economy? Have we brought reforms, improvement in our tax collection system? All of that is relevant. So most important tax reforms directly are very relevant here. For example, GST, the DTC, Direct Tax Code, then the SHOM committee, etc. Once taxation is complete, then expenditure, subsidies, Capex, etc. is very important, and that we need to study. And then all the deficits. So whether it is revenue deficit, effective revenue deficit, fiscal deficit, primary deficit, monetized deficit, all of that we need to know. Okay. Then we also need to know the FRBM system, which gives us the planning and targets for the deficits itself. Let us look at the past year questions from this section. Again, lot of questions from this section in past. So distinguish between capital budget and revenue budget. Directly a question on the classification of the budgets. Last year itself, last paper itself. Explain the meaning of investment in an economy in the terms of capital formation. Discuss the factors to be considered while designing a concession agreement between public entity and a private entity. Okay, this is also related to this section. Investment, mobilization of resources. Okay, and it is asked in the context of public sector role here. So this is essentially the role of government in investment, and within that context we are also talking about PPP. So this is more of an interdisciplinary question, but yes, this is talking about budgeting also. Then the rationale of GST tax, compensation of states. Okay, and how has COVID impacted the GST compensation and tensions? So that was a very relevant issue back then, and directly a question on GST. And then previous to that, enumerate the indirect taxes which have been subsumed in the GST. Also comment on the revenue implication on the GST introduction since July 2017. So direct question on GST again. Okay, so tax reforms are very important in that context. Then public expenditure management is a challenge to the government of India in the context of budget making during the post-liberalization period. Clarify this. Okay, public expenditure management. So how do government manages its expenditure while maintaining the deficits in control? So how do we maintain the discipline? Okay, and this talks about the entire post-liberalization period. Next topic is monetary economics and financial system. So first of all, the monetary economics itself. So there are many concepts in that. On that also we have seen direct questions. So measurement of money supply, first of all, types of money, the role of money in the economy, all of that we need to know. Okay, and then we need to study RBI and the monetary policy in India, and then the monetary policy tools and money supply in India. Okay, It is in this context that we also study inflation, the inflation in India, the CPI, WPI, GDP deflator, inflation rate. Okay, so all these concepts are very important. Types of inflation, the impact of inflation on economy. Direct question in mains have been asked on that. Then how do we control inflation? The role of MPC, Monetary Policy Committee, and RBI. So inflation is also very relevant topic from which direct question in both PT and mains have been asked, and you need to study it in detail. Then banking in India. Okay, so types of bank, for example, the functions of bank. Then the banking reforms in India. Okay, Narsimham Committee. There are various committees here. All of that we need to study here. For example, the issues with the bank in recent time. So, for example, we have had a big problem regarding NPA, non-performing assets. The loans which bank provide and unable to recover. Okay, the poster boy of NPAs in India, Vijay Mallya. Okay, and then there are many such frauds like Nirav Modi, etc. All of these people created NPAs, and that is a big problem. Then there is a issue of twin balance sheet, double repression, monetary policy transmission. So you have to study that. Then non-banking financial institutions in India. Okay, banking is just one part of financial system, a very small part. Financial system is much more bigger than the banking itself. So non-bank finance corporations, development finance institutes like IDBI, SIDBI, EXIM, okay, ICICI. These are all DFI, development finance institutions, ILFS. Then the role of financial markets and overview of capital market. The role that financial market plays in the economic development of India, that is also very relevant. What role capital markets specifically play. And then another topic, which is financial inclusion in India. So once we have discussed all the institutions, monetary policy, then institutions in monetary policy making, then institution in financial system, banking, non-banking, then capital market, money market, etc. After we have discussed the institutions, etc., we need to study the financial inclusion in India. Okay, need and future, Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, payment bank, small bank, etc. So financial inclusion is also very relevant here. In recent years, we have seen few questions from banking, but we've seen a lot of questions earlier, and there is no reason why questions should not be there. So there can be many more questions from this section soon. Okay, but I was picking questions from last 5 years, so there was only one question directly from this segment. There were other questions which were relevant for banking, but they were more multidisciplinary or multi-topic in nature. Nonetheless, there was a direct question that among several factors for India's potential growth, savings rate is the most effective one. Do you agree? What are the factors available for growth potential? So this is directly from financial system, because it is financial sector's responsibility to push the savings in the country. The next topic, which is very relevant and unfortunately not covered anywhere, is the international trade. So international trade is very important, in which we have to study the international trade theory, we have to study the international trade policy, and what are the various tools to design a trade policy. So for example, first we start with the trade theory. So there we have to study all the Adam Smith, David Ricardo models. Then we need to study the modern trade theory, in which we have to know the HO model and some of the other developments. Then we need to analyze the trade numbers. For example, how much are India's exports and imports? That is trade volume. Then what India is exporting, what India is importing. that is trade basket, and then with whom are we trading, that is trade partners. So we have to analyze our trade from all these perspectives. And when we talk about trade partners, from that perspective, all the trade agreements also become very relevant. All the FTAs, all the CECAs that India has signed. So this is itself a quite big topic in itself. Then the trade policy. Okay, India has a trade policy, foreign trade policy. What kind of policies do we use in order to increase our exports? What kind of policies do we use in order to control certain imports? So all of that we need to study. So this is international trade part. After the trade, it is balance of payments, which is very relevant. So in that we study current account, capital account, etc. Okay, we also deal with the topic of convertibility. So capital and current account convertibility, full and partial convertibility, all these concepts come under this topic, and we need to be aware of them. Direct questions have been asked. Once we have covered the trade and BOP, the next topic would be the foreign capital and exchange rate. So under foreign capital, we have the FDI, foreign direct investment, FPI, foreign portfolio investment. Okay, then we also have external commercial borrowings, private borrowing of people from outside. That is also very relevant. Foreign exchange reserves. Okay, we also need to analyze what is the impact of this FDI on India. What are the benefits? What are the disadvantages of all the foreign capital? Okay, and then what is our policy for foreign capital? In that we need to study, for example, SEZ, PLI. There are more, but this gives you a adequate hint here. And then we also need to study the exchange rate and how do we control our exchange rate in India. Types of exchange rate, fixed, floating, the changes in exchange rate, depreciation of rupee, appreciation of rupee, all of that we need to cover here. Then the currency war and issues. Okay, very relevant. Direct question was asked on that. Okay, how China is using its currency, renminbi, in order to affect the international trade. How USA ensures that dollars remains the supreme currency of trade. Okay, very, very relevant. And then finally, we have the topic of international organizations. So, first of all, what is the nature of the international agreements? Then World Bank and the IMF. IMF is more important from our perspective, not World Bank as such. Okay, but again, we need to know the World Bank structure, etc., the working of World Bank. But more important is IMF, because it is IMF which is related to the reforms. It is IMF packages which are more relevant and make more news. Then we have certain other institutions like ADB, BRICS Bank, AIIB, etc. We just need to be aware of them. Direct question is unlikely as of now, but again, there can be certain developments. Then bilateral, regional, global groupings, agreements that involve India. Then WTO, the mother of all topic here. WTO itself is a very big topic. We need to study the WTO agreements. We need to study the WTO principles. We need to study what is the debate regarding India, India's subsidies, India's agriculture, India's pharmaceutical, and what are the demands and expectation of India. So all of that we need to study. So that is a big and very important topic. That is all in international economics. Big topic in itself. Let us look at some of the questions from this topic. So first of all, the question was on Cpec. That Cpec is viewed as cardinal subset of China's larger One Belt, One Road. Give a brief description of Cpec and enumerate the reasons why India has distanced itself from the Cpec. Well, this is obviously a relevant question for international relations, IR, but it was asked in paper 3. So you have to provide a lot of economic perspective. Then, how would the recent phenomena of protectionism and currency manipulation in world trade affects macroeconomic stability of India. Okay. Direct question on currency, war, and exchange rate and trade. Then prior to that, justify the need for the FDI and development of the Indian economy. Why there is a gap between MOU signed and the actual FDI. Suggest remedial steps to be taken to increase actual FDI in India. So absolutely direct specific question on FDI. Unfortunately, this cannot even be indirectly interpreted from the UPSC provided syllabus. So this entire big topic of international economics is very relevant, as we can see so many questions from this in past. How has globalization led to the reduction of unemployment or employment in the formal sector of the Indian economy? Is increased informalization detrimental to the development of the country? So again, direct question from international economics. Okay. Then FDI in the defense sector is now set to have liberalized. What influence this is expected to have on India's defense and economy in the short and the long run? So as we can see, so many direct questions from this section. And the scope that we have discussed, the study plan that we have discussed, will cover every possible topic under this. Okay. Next is the sectors of Indian economy. So first we have Indian agriculture. Over here, the topics provided by UPSC themselves are quite sufficient. Okay. So let us look at all the topics that we need to study. So, but here, the way we have provided that is more in a proper pattern, in a certain order that will help you to understand better. The UPSC scope of syllabus is good in agriculture, but it is not defined in a very good manner. For example, land reforms should not be the last topic. So agriculture overview. Under overview, I have to study what are the features of Indian agriculture, what are the issues there, issues regarding productivity, sustainability, farmers' income, etc. Okay. Land reforms in India, cropping pattern in India. So this is all under overview. This is what with which you start the topic. Okay. Then the agriculture policy in India. Under that, we have to study APMC, FCI, MSP, buffer stock policy, ENAM. Okay. So all the major institutions and policies we need to cover. Then the PDS system, public distribution system. It is not exactly under agriculture, but this is a welfare topic significantly linked to agriculture. So we cover it here. So we need to talk about the PDS system in India, how it is governed. What are the issues? What is the working of this PDS system in India? What are the disadvantages? Targeted PDS, Antyodaya Ann Yojana. Okay. And then what are the alternatives to the PDS? The direct benefit transfer, national food security. It is a big topic in itself and very relevant. Okay. Then the farm subsidies in India. First of all, how do we define the farm subsidies? Then the types of subsidies, how do they work? What is the need for subsidies? And what kind of negative impact subsidies have? By the way, subsidies are not always positive, not always have a great positive impact. They can sometimes have significant negative impacts also. And the UPSC has asked two specific questions on subsidy from the negative perspective itself. Okay, so we have seen questions from both the perspectives. So the types of farm subsidies, then the irrigation and power subsidies, fertilizer subsidies. These are the most important significant subsidies in agriculture. Biggest is fertilizer subsidy, then the irrigation and power subsidy, then the credit subsidy, and finally the seed and the other inputs. All of these are direct inputs, agricultural inputs, and these are subsidized. So how do they clash with the WTO rules? All of that is relevant. Then the topic of agriculture marketing. Okay. So we've already mentioned the topic of APMC, FCI, etc. So in the marketing, this comes in detail. Okay. APMC, its role, the APMC rules, the Model APMC Act, the changes in APMC, how it can bring changes to the farmer, all of that is relevant. A big topic in itself. Then the private and cooperative sector in marketing of agriculture produce in India. Then the technology missions and e-technology in the aid of farmers, that is also part of the agriculture production as well as marketing. So this can be there in the marketing itself as well. Then agriculture finance, which is itself a very big topic. Under that, we have to study the cooperative banks, the NABARD, etc. Okay, and then we have the food processing and the related industries. Okay, so under this, we need to study the, first of all, the features of the food processing industry in India, its input, its output, its linkages with agriculture, its linkages with the food supply and common public. Then we also need to know the food-based industry versus non-food-based industry, location, upstream, downstream requirements. Okay, upstream, downstream is much similar to backward and forward linkages, not too much of a difference there, but still these are certain perspectives. Then what are the growth drivers for food processing industry? What pushes the growth of food processing? What improves the output? Okay, that is relevant here. The FDI policy in food processing, the investment opportunities, and what are the schemes? And then the supply chain management in Indian agriculture. How food processing can improve it, that is all very relevant. And finally, a topic which is not mentioned in UPSC's provided syllabus, but nonetheless, when you study APMC, when you study the food processing, that is always indirectly captured. So you also need to study the contract farming. What are the benefits? Why do we need contract farming for food processing, for further growth of agriculture, for development of agriculture? What are the issues? How it is still not preferred by farmers? Why they are still afraid of it? Such issues. Let us look at the past year questions. So in the previous section, how did the land reforms in some part of the country help to improve the socio-economic conditions of marginal and small farmers? A direct question on old land reforms. How did the land reforms in some parts of the country? If it would be on present, it would be how do the land reforms? Then it is a question, next question is on occupational structure, that countries shift from agriculture to industry. But in India, we have seen a shift from agriculture to services. So why it is happening? Okay, so not directly a question as such on agriculture, but it is a question on sectors of Indian economy, occupational structure, the structure of economy, yes, linked to agriculture as well. And then next question is how the emphasis on certain crops brought the changes in cropping pattern in recent past. Elaborate the emphasis on millets production and consumption. Okay, so directly on agriculture production, cropping pattern, how the government policies can affect the cropping pattern. Then assess the role of National Horticulture Mission in boosting production, productivity and income of horticulture farmers. Okay, so directly a question on government scheme in agriculture. So such questions are regularly being asked every year. Then we have industry and services. So within industry, we have the industrial development in India, the historical perspective, the post-reform industrial development. Okay, the industrial policy in India, how does it affect the industry? Then we also need to know the specific aspect of industry. Okay, for example, public sector undertakings. We also need to study the privatization by government because a lot of industries were in public sector. Then we also need to study specifically the MSME, micro, small and medium enterprises. Okay, how the size of industrial unit affects its output, its growth, what kind of impact it has on economy, the linkage of industry with employment, the linkage of industry with export, Then if India has to counter China, if India has to grow as an important alternate to China in global economy, it must revive and rejuvenate its manufacturing. That is also very relevant. So manufacturing sector specifically we need to study. Okay? So industry itself is very important and big topic. Then labor reforms and how do the labor issues affect our industry, that is also relevant. Then within services sector, what are the features of services sector? Can services sector continue to grow for India like it has been in the post reform period? Then how much labor it can absorb, the issues related to jobless growth, etc. And then the specific sectors: transport, tourism, retail, IT, and pharma. The sectors from services which are very relevant. From industry also, there are some specific sectors that we need to know about. For example, automobile, for example, textile, for example, leather. Okay, these are some important relevant sectors specifically. Then let us look at the infrastructure. So, how infrastructure is linked to the growth? Why infrastructure investment is necessary to improve the growth? Then what drives the growth of infrastructure sectors? How we can increase the infrastructure sector? How it will improve? Then the government policy for infrastructure, and then the specific sectors: road, civil aviation, railways, port, and inland water transport. Okay, so independent questions on any of them can also be asked. For example, a question can be asked on Air India privatization. For example, a question can be asked on Bibek Debroy Committee in railways and railway reforms. Okay. So many questions are possible there. Then energy and power sector, particularly important is, for example, how is India going to achieve the self-sustainability in energy production? Then specifically the renewable energy, most important solar, but followed by wind and other aspects. So that is also very relevant. Then the reforms in the energy sector, all of that is very important in infrastructure. Then the investment models. Okay. So within that, we have to study the PPP partnership model, the public-private partnership model, PPP models. So what are these? Why? What is the need for PPP? Then what do we need in order to have a good PPP system? What kind of institutional support do we need? Legal justice system, what kind of that system is required? Then what are the models in public-private partnership? So we have direct contracting, we have BOT, we have DBFO, we have EPC, Swiss challenge, HAM. There are so many different models that you need to know about. Let us look at some of the questions from the sectors of Indian economy. So we have, for example, investment in infrastructure is essential for more rapid and inclusive growth. Discuss in light of India's experience. A direct question on the importance of infrastructure. Then the account for the failure of manufacturing sector in achieving the goal of labor intensive exports rather than the capital intensive exports. They just measure for labor intensive rather than capital intensive exports. First of all, it is also linked to trade, but apart from that, as I've mentioned, labor is very important issue regarding industry, because the entire onus of absorbing the labor in India is on industries. That is why it is very relevant. Next question is regarding PPP in airports. Okay, so that has also been asked, a direct question on transport sector, particularly airport development in the form of PPP. So, for example, when this was asked, it was 2018. So, at that time, we should have talked about the difficulties we had regarding the Delhi and Mumbai airport development under PPP. Delhi and Mumbai are the two most premium airport in India, yet we only received 2 bids for them. That means private sector was not interested in participating. Forget about other airports. Okay. So there has been lack of PPP here. because of the experience we had regarding Delhi and Mumbai airport. So these are the kind of things we should have answered them. And then the question on transform, energize, and clean India. Okay, measures proposed in the budget to achieve the objective. So transform, transform, energize, and clean India is about improving the conditions for people, giving them better infrastructure, giving them better power backup, making India more clean. So this is more from the perspective of the governance delivery. But infrastructure is still very relevant in this context because governance delivery will improve and is improving with infrastructure. Then industrial growth rate has lagged behind in overall growth in the GDP in the post-reform period. Give reasons how far the recent change in industrial policy are capable of increasing the industrial growth rate. So this is a direct question on the performance of industry and the policies. And then among the remaining topics, we have poverty and inequality. So now we have come to the welfare section. The first thing that we discussed was the economic measurement and planning, growth, development, and planning. Then we discussed the core concepts regarding the role of government in an economy, then the financial system, and then the international trade. These are the three core concept areas in economy where we have to study a lot of theory. And then we looked at the sectors of Indian economy: agriculture, industry, services, infrastructure. Once we have covered all of this, almost 80%, in fact 90% of the syllabus is done. Now we are remaining with some topics regarding welfare, for example. So here we have to study the poverty. So the types of poverty, the causes of poverty, okay, and then the poverty measurement in India. Then what are the new measurements of poverty? Okay, and then what is the approach for poverty alleviation? How we should reduce the poverty? What kind of policies can we make? Okay, and the inclusive growth, for example, is also relevant for poverty. Then the topic of inequality. Okay, so for example, how much inequality is there in India? How it is relevant? How it affects the society? And how it affects the governance? And why it is a big issue, how we can control it. All of that comes into this. And then the unemployment. So the nature of unemployment in India, its measurement, types, etc. Okay. Causes of unemployment. Then what is the impact of unemployment on economy, on society? Then a very specific topic in India's context, that is jobless growth. Usually growth automatically brings more employment, but in India it didn't happen. Okay, so that we have to study in India's context and we have to study its reasons. Then some of the other issues, for example, the government policies, okay, in the welfare itself, after unemployment, then remaining issues in welfare. So women specific issues, then education, health, all of that is also relevant for human capital development and also a part of welfare. Okay, and then from the welfare economics, let us look at some of the past questions. Explain the intra-generational and intergenerational issue of equity from the perspective of economic growth and sustainable development. So inclusive growth is regarding intra-generational and sustainable growth is regarding intergenerational. Okay, so that we had to link and elaborate. Then it is argued the strategy of inclusive growth is intended to meet the objectives of inclusiveness and sustainability together. Comment on this statement. Okay, a direct question on sustainability and inclusiveness once more. And prior to that, what are the salient features of inclusive growth? Has India been experiencing such a growth process? And then analyze and measure for and suggest measures for inclusive growth. So we have discussed that when we were discussing syllabus. So direct questions on the concept of growth, development, sustainability, and inclusiveness. And then these are some additional topics, okay, specifically for PT. Specifically for So we have microeconomics. Within microeconomics, what is relevant? Demand and supply. Then elasticity. Then what are the factors of production? And then what is the returns to scale, return to factor, etc. And then the market structure. On all of these, we have seen direct questions. So we need to know about what is competition, what are the features of competition, what is monopoly, what is oligopoly, and monopolistic competition. Okay, so that also we need to study in addition. And then we have macroeconomics. Okay, all of these are core basics from which questions, particularly in PT, have been asked. In macroeconomics, we need to know circular flow of income, savings in investment, okay, the theories for investment, then the growth models, Harrod, Domer, Lewis, Rostow, etc. Then some of the other concepts in macroeconomics, such as Phillips curve, Lorentz curve, Laffer curve, etc. So that is what we need to study from macro and micro. Nothing more is required. This will cover everything that can be asked. Okay, only once in blue moon they can ask something that is outside this scope. If you can cover this much, everything will be covered. Okay. So with that, we complete the detailed syllabus and the study plan. And best of luck. I hope it has helped you to grasp the overall coverage that is needed in order to cover Indian economy properly. It is really a big topic of the syllabus and is very relevant not only for the subject itself, but in essay, in your interview, and its understanding also helps you even in your optional subjects. Okay, many optional subjects. So understanding of economics is very good if you can develop it, and the scope that we have discussed here will give you proper understanding and background in economics. Thank you.